Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for the pizza webinar, where we'll be taking a look at why consider moving to Microsoft Azure. So why would you consider moving your on-premises infrastructure, whether that's servers, storage, other infrastructure, and moving it up to Microsoft Azure? So we've been doing a number of recent webinars, both on cloud resources as well as on-prem resources. So you may have been to some of those recent ones, or you could just mention on the evaluation if you want some of those resources where we talk about on-prem servers, on-prem storage. And so we've also been talking about cloud storage, cloud servers, et cetera, so that depending on where you are on the planning cycle, you can go ahead and get the information that may help you decide where you want to be, what makes most sense for you at this point. I'm joined today by Dave Ferg. Many of you know him, one of our senior consultants, and he'll be diving into the content itself. So looking at a little bit at the agenda, after the introductions, Dave will be looking at several factors of Azure. So looking at kind of how does Azure build resiliency into your network, looking at the various capabilities of networking and storage, looking at compute capabilities or servers, also looking at what about if something goes bad? How do you kind of recover data? What are the capabilities within Azure there? And also a very important topic, and that's looking at security as well. So looking at all of those factors that may influence your decision on whether to go to cloud, stay another refresh cycle through on-prem, or a combination, which many people do. All right, so hopefully you have your pizza in front of you. If you don't, just note Julie Dellinger's email address on the screen. And if you still haven't gotten it in 5 minutes or so, you may want to reach out to Julie, and she'll try to help track things down for you. All right, during the webinar, audio is in presentation mode, so you'll be able to hear Dave and myself. But where the participants are, we won't be able to hear you. But we do that so if there's any background noise, music on hold, those kinds of things that participants may be experiencing, that doesn't come through the whole group. You can reach me throughout today's webinar through the chat tab and go to webinar, as well as to the questions tab. Any questions that come to mind, just drop them right into the questions tab, and we'll save those up for the end for the Q&A, and Dave can then answer those questions for you at the end. This presentation is being recorded, as well as we'll be able to send you that link to the recording, as well as the PDF of this presentation, so that you'll have that deck, and that'll be emailed to you later on this afternoon, so you don't have to write furiously. And finally, there is an evaluation that you'll receive later on this afternoon. It gives you a chance to let us know how we did so we can try to improve. Also gives you a chance to let us know what additional resources that you might need to kind of help you along whatever your next step would be for Azure. And there'll be a number of options there for you, or you can write in something else. And we do try to make it a little bit more fun. We'll take all the completed evaluations, and we'll draw from those so that one person will get an Amazon $50 gift card. So if your house is like mine, rarely does the day go by that Amazon doesn't stop by. Hopefully it's helpful to you. So a little bit about System Source for those that may be new to our organization. So we've been around since 1981. There's about 70 of us at System Source, and we work with IT professionals from South Central Pennsylvania all the way through Maryland and down to the Washington, D.C. area. And a lot of folks first come to us when they need to acquire new technology. For example, Azure. So it could be, for compute, for storage, for security, for wireless, for virtualization, for the design pieces, the implementation, the support of those things. All could happen where it talks about, where it says acquire. So whether you're getting on-prem resources, say, for example, Hewlett Packard servers or storage, or cloud resources, for example, Microsoft Azure, we can kind of help you across those areas regardless of where your resources live for your data center, whether that's on-prem, Azure, Amazon Web Services, hosting locations, our data center, regardless of where those places may be, including software as a service, we can help you manage and implement across those technologies. So folks are really acquiring because they need to improve. So we talked and touched a little bit on consulting and cloud services. But our training group also helps train IT professionals as well as end users. And there's about 600 plus courses available on our website there on all the technologies I've mentioned, plus about 2 or 3 dozen additional ones, either specific, say, for example, Cisco training or Microsoft training, as well as through general topics like IT security, for example, all available on our website, and also all available remotely as well. Present is professional AV, so if you're designing rooms for Teams rooms, WebEx, Zoom rooms, so all the monitors, microphones, speakers, cameras, all those types of things that make those spaces work in our modern hybrid work environments, that's the type of work that our professional AV group does, including digital signage. And finally, we maintain all these things, whether it's you call us when you need help under service and support, kind of as a reactive basis, as well as we can do 7x24 support. Just follow the voice prompts in our main number after hours, and that can get you to the support that you need. Whether you have a contract with us or not, we can still support you on a reactive basis, or managed services where we are the IT department for dozens of organizations in the region. Okay, we do have some upcoming webinars coming up. So on the 21st, we have one that's going to be helping folks kind of understand what's the difference between a SIM, so kind of a security incident management tool, so kind of doing it yourself and responding to those things versus having a managed security service. So help folks kind of understand those and be able to help better select what makes sense for them. Then our AV group will be doing a webinar on the 25th with Crestron. And then on April the 2nd, we'll be doing one that's going to be looking at the on-premises storage refresh. So today we're looking at Azure, so cloud. The one on the 2nd will be looking at some of the on-premises storage piece in that place, and we'll be working with Hewlett-Packard on that one. And then on the 3rd of April, we'll be looking at additional security topics. In this case, what are the defenses you need for the top 10 security breach scenarios that we are seeing out in the wild? So hopefully some of those may be beneficial to you. I'll drop the links in the chat as well. Plus, when you get to the deck, all of these are clickable links if you wish to register. With that, let me hand the reins over to Dave, please.
Oh, thank you, Chris, and thank you everybody for joining today. It's my goal today to present the argument or present the case for why you might want to consider Azure as a cloud platform for your IT infrastructure. So my arguments or my presentation is going to be built around what are the two parts. What would be the business reasons why you would be considering moving up there? And then I'm going to be talking about some of the features that make Azure attractive, possibly more than your on-premises environment. So this is going to be a little on the high level, and it's designed around giving you some kind of information, some kind of understanding of why one platform could be maybe not a replacement for your on-prem, but an addition to your on-prem that gives you new features, new capabilities that you don't have today. So why the cloud? Right now, and you're probably all familiar with this, a lot of what I'm about to say it's something you've either heard before or thought before on your own, and maybe even starting down the path. So just kind of stay with me as I kind of kind of set the groundwork as we get moving ahead. So right now we're in a world where automation is really starting to take off in the digital world, where we're using AI, where we're using chatbots and other things to do work for us. We're using logic apps, if you're up in the Azure world, where we're building processes so that we can potentially get a step ahead or sometimes just keep up with our own market demands and maybe what our competitors are doing as well. So we're being forced to be agile, to be quick, to be flexible, to make quick changes as one technology looks like the hot new thing, and then the next year it's something else that's the hot new thing. So you need to be able to move rapidly to where you think you can gain some business advantages. As I just mentioned, AI is a hot topic right now. It's in a lot of discussions. Everybody tells you that their processes have AI in them. And that's true. A lot of vendors have built that in. But as far as a small to mid-sized market, let's say, most people are still in the very early adoption stage of direct use of AI, not just using things that use AI in the background, but using it themselves. So you need to be thinking, though, because I don't see AI as going away quickly. It's going to probably morph a little bit, but but it's going to be around. You're going to have to deal with it in some way. So you need to worry about, where can it help you in your business, and where will it be actually a necessity in your business, and how will you implement it, and what will it cost? And those types of questions always come to mind. But before you even head down there, step one should be, do you even have an infrastructure that is poised to take advantage of these new technologies? Are you locked into technologies that can't do this processing, can't expand rapidly, can't be changed rapidly? So you need to make sure you've gotten yourself a platform, maybe in addition to your on-prem. Maybe you'll consider migrating your whole on-prem world, but getting to a place where it's dynamic and you can be flexible and moving along. And that's what the cloud is built for. It's built to support not only the rapid deployment of your legacy technology, so you can still bring your Windows virtual machines up and still have file storage and all those things we still need, but also any new technologies as they emerge. Your vendors are now building them for the cloud first, and they're going to appear out there for you to be using as they become available. And for most businesses, we're not the size of Microsoft generally, or AWS or any of those big ones, but the cloud lets you leverage what these large companies can afford to build. So they can build these multi-billion-dollar data centers scattered all over the world. You can now just take advantage of it, and your business can be more robust, more reliable, more flexible, more quick to market, just by using what the big folks are building. And so that's one of the great advantages of the cloud, is that flexibility, the redundancies that they've built in, and the new technologies coming out. Those are really strong business drivers. So let's talk about what we mean by when we say go to the cloud. Most of us, I don't even know what most of us think. Many of us have probably been using Office 365, which is just a cloud version for our emails and things like that. But if you're not familiar, there's always, let's just kind of categorize them. There's infrastructure as a service. This is where you're going to have your storage, your networking, your switching, your firewalls, things that you would have on-prem just to build the piping of your world and the security of your world. And that's what the Azure platform offers. It's the ability to go up there and have networks and routers and VPN connections and machines and workstations, etc. That's infrastructure as a service. The Azure world also offers something called platform as a service, which is abstracting away the lower end of that, the infrastructure and the servers. Microsoft will manage that for you. You then manage the applications that would sit on top of that. So all you need to manage is the SQL, or the file shares, or the logic apps, or whatever it is you want to put on top of that, without having to manage the servers sitting up underneath. And then there's the Office 365 SaaS products, and there's many vendors out there offering SaaS. This is where you're not even managing the application, you're managing your data within the application. You're just using it. So we have a variety of different categories, if you will, that we can use for the cloud, and which you use depends on how much you want to manage. It depends on how much infrastructure you want to have to take on for yourself, and how much you just want to let go and let someone else deal with it. As we can see here in this slide, the basic idea here is, if you're on-prem, you're responsible for everything from the data centers, environmentals, all the way through information and data protection. As you move up into the infrastructure as a service world, now if you just took, for instance, you take your on-prem VMs and just make them Azure VMs, Microsoft now will start managing the data centers, the physical networks, and the hosts that host your VMs, and then you still manage the operating systems and above. So you haven't lost control, you've just lost that lowest level. As you move into the platform as a service, Microsoft is still handling the lowest ends all the way through the operating systems. You're picking it up at potentially network controls and application configurations and these things, plus all the data and identity managements and things like that. And as you move up to SaaS, you have the least responsibility for anything in the lower ends, and you're just worried about managing your accounts, your devices, your information, and things like that. There's a proper fit for each one of these in your world, potentially. Some people by regulation have to have things on premises. Some people for performance have to have things on premises. Maybe you just upgraded your on premises and this is not going to go anywhere soon. So what Azure would offer you is the ability to do a hybrid configuration and start implementing some of these things in addition to what you already have as you bring in new technologies. So the Azure world has a wide variety of technologies for you to choose from. This is just a quick screenshot of the Azure products. If you went out and Googled Azure products, you could just hit this page. But they're categorized by, they have things for analytics, they have things for compute, they do containers, so you can roll out things as containers, databases, identity management, integration with your on-prem and other vendors. And as you click into each one of these, as you can see on this screenshot, the AI was the one selected. There are different services in each one of these, from Databricks to bot services to machine learning, all of these things. And then each one of these have their own categories of things that you can choose from. So there's a lot of things out there in Azure to choose from. And then that can be augmented with vendors' products. So if you like Cisco Meraki as firewalls and things like that, they have an Azure-based device that you can deploy into your Azure world as well. And now your Cisco Meraki world can expand from on-prem to into Azure and still be managed the same way from the same Cisco portal. So not only do we have this wide variety of things that Microsoft offers, but a lot of the big vendors now have things that you can put up into their world and utilize technologies you already like and are part of your world now. Another thing to consider when you're, is the cloud right for me, is the fact that it is a global network. It is a global replicated network, 60 plus regions, 300 plus data centers. Each one of those built with fault tolerance, each one of those built with high-speed connectivity so that you can replicate between data centers, between regions, so that even though you are a one location company, you can now put your resources up into a place that is highly replicated, and then you can add additional replication to have maybe something on the East Coast, something on the West Coast, just in case there's a DR and you need, of region scale that you need to keep your resources available. This just becomes available to us to choose and implement without having to go out and deal with real estate issues or anything like that, or having different vendors in different locations that each have their own SLAs and ways of management. This is one vendor across all these areas. So that's a strong argument for why you might want to consider, putting some things up into Azure, if not move your environment to Azure. Again, that's something that needs to be determined, through some kind of an assessment, either on your part or with the help of a consultant of some sort. Just looking at the market in general, now this is not an argument to why you should move, but this just show what they project to be the trend of cloud services, specifically infrastructure as a service. This is from 2023 through 2034. They're showing like a tenfold growth in the use of these platforms. So again, not an argument for why you should go, but you can just kind of see where the trend is going. And since the dollars are going that way, vendors are developing for that area. So if you want some of the latest, greatest from Microsoft, or sometimes from a third-party vendor, you may need to be up in the cloud to get that. So if there's a feature that you need to do something in your business, or to be able to respond to a change in your business, the cloud may be where you can get those features first. So that's just kind of a trend of where that's going. Something to keep in mind, because in some ways, it's our decision to go up to the cloud. For some folks, it can very much feel like you're being pushed there. And in some ways you are, because your competitors are going there and they'll become a little quicker to deployment. But this is happening. So you need to be getting yourself ready for it and planning why you might want to be there. So some of the arguments about going to the cloud is it's moving a lot of your capital expenditures over to operation expenses. So they become predictable monthly expenses that you can manage, and change as the needs require. If you bought a large infrastructure for your on-premises world and then needed to downsize an area, you still have this large purchase that you're dealing with. Whereas in the cloud, you can shrink or grow as necessary. Are there savings to be made in the cloud? And the honest answer to that is maybe. Yes, you're losing the capital expense, you're going to operation expense, maybe that's easier to budget and things like that. Depending on what you're doing in the cloud, it could be a little more expensive, because if I go back to that other slide, I'm not going to, but if I went back to the other slide of like these multiple data centers, if you actually decided to implement replication across all these different areas with multiple servers in multiple locations, you're actually implementing a more robust infrastructure than what you have. And so the cost could be a little more. So the out-of-pocket, I don't want to promise that this is the cost saver for you. If you went like for like, what you have on-prem into the cloud, there's a good possibility you're saving some money, but I don't want to make that promise for you. All right. Things you can do though to help with your costs, and this is a little example here, even deploying a virtual machine, there's different ways to pay for it. So you pay as you go, which is the most expensive because you're just paying as you use it. You can prepay ahead of time and get discounts. You can reserve VMs, and I'm going to say VMs because that's a compute here, so that they're available and available for you, not just in general, and you get discount. You can do different things with licenses. When you pay for a VM up in Azure, a Windows license comes with it. But if you already have Windows licenses you want to use, there are hybrid benefits so you can reuse your licenses instead of the Azure license and save money. So there's a lot of ways in which we can look at saving the cost of moving up to Azure just in the way we pay for it as well. The cloud will offer you the latest technologies and the up-to-date versions of things. So when they roll something out, you are getting the latest of it. You're in Office 365, for example, that's a SaaS, I understand. But you're not having to worry about what the version is sitting up underneath of that. Microsoft is worrying about that. And Azure is built to support the cloud-first environment and the cloud-native strategy. So this is where it shines. So when you get up into that cloud, Azure is built to support that kind of environment. It supports mobile and geographically separated workforces. Again, this is a globally separated network, a globally dispersed network with high replications. We can have servers replicated for fault tolerance, maybe for DR, maybe they're load balanced across multiple regions. So there's a lot of things we can do to handle a workforce that may be moving around in a large geographic area. Azure is built to implement or to integrate with your on-premises environment. So it's not like you're going to have to go to the deep end of the pool and just jump. Between having gateways and VPN connections that we can use to protect your external accesses and your connections to your office, we can even move some of the management and monitoring up into Azure. So Azure's portal in that monitoring console is looking at your Azure resources and can look at your on-premises resources as well. So there's one place to go and see your entire world. Flexibility, I've already mentioned this, speed to market, dynamically scalable, so I can get as big as I need or as small as I need. I can build HA, I can build DR, I can implement and decommission quickly on there, and that translates to business advantage, as you can reduce costs quickly as necessary if something is not where your company is going, and you can quickly change those investment dollars over to where your company does need to be. And of course, Azure is built around security. So security is a big thing in the Azure world, from the Entra ID accounts directory to services like Defender for Cloud, which monitors and offers recommendations and helps you implement the security features, information securities, key vaults to hold your secrets, and even role-based access control to secure management of your environment. So everything in Azure is built around security. If you did another Google into Azure for their security settings, they have a whole website that talks about what regulations they comply with, how they handle HIPAA, how do they handle the European systems and things like that. So you can get all that information there. Their foundation is built secure, and then in the areas where you are responsible, they offer you recommendations on what is best practice for securities into those areas. So you're not even going in blind. They're telling you this is what you probably should consider in your security environment. So let's just talk a little bit about some of the things of Azure itself. So I'm going to start talking a little bit about features. 60 data centers across 60 regions, over 300 data centers. These data centers are pulled together into regions, with each data center being an availability zone. If you look right here, this would be a data center, this would be a data center, this would be a data center, all considered all in the same region, so they're all high speed connected to each other. Services that you deploy could be zonal, which means they live in one zone only at a time. Can think of like a VM. It can only live in one zone at a time. If you wanted to have multiple copies of that VM, you could do that, but then you are the one responsible for making sure that they're replicated. There are also cross-zone services, such as like a load balancer. If I deployed a load balancer service in my world, it's actually available in all the zones for you. So it's already taken care of. It's spread across the zone. What this is doing for you, when you replicate across zones, is you are giving yourself data center failure protection by replicating off to another zone, all within the same region on that. Right? So you could have something in availability zone 1. You could replicate it in availability zone 2. You could replicate it also to availability zone 3 if you want. You can even replicate cross-region. Now that's something you have to explicitly set up, but then you could have your replications here in the East US and maybe be replicating over to the West US if you wanted it. All right, I've just mentioned this already. Some services are zone redundant by default. So if you deploy those, load balancer being the example, it's already in all the zones for you, the availability zone. When you hear the word the term availability zone, be thinking data center. Okay, so here's an example. You want to create a VM. A VM is a zonal device. It only lives in one zone by default. But when you're creating it, you can define whether you want that device to be not redundant, it's only going to live in the one zone, or you want to assign it to an availability zone, to one or more availability zones. We'll talk about these a little bit later. You could also define, when you're creating a VM, define it as part of a scale set, so that, you know, think of it as a cluster of multiple machines that could, if you configure it such, dynamically grow and shrink as the load demands. So we have those kinds of options as you are creating your virtual machines. If you decide you want it in availability zone, you can now select what availability zones you want it in. Now, just as a FYI, it's a VM, it's designed to be in one zone. If I decide to check it off to be in zone 1 and zone 2, that's 2 VMs. I pay for 2 VMs, okay? Just be aware of that. You can spread them across zones, but you have to pay for it with a VM. But these are the kind of options that are available to you. In the networking world, the types of things that Microsoft offers, starting with the virtual network, which is kind of the backbone of where all your networking is going to start. A virtual network is just an address range from which you are going to, or can, carve out one or more subnets for your virtual machines and other resources that need network connectivity. Anything within a virtual network, anything within this virtual network right here, communicates with each other without any kind of routing configurations or anything like that. So subnet 1 knows how to get to subnet 2 and vice versa. If I created a second VNet, by default, these two do not talk to each other, but I could configure VNet peering, and now they do act as if they're one. So I don't need any additional routing to make this connection between them, all right? But I do have options like route tables, whereas if I don't want to necessarily peer, I could use a route table. In this example, it's over here on VNet 2. This route table says, hey, if you're trying to get over to subnet 1, here's how you get there. So I can control what traffic can go and how it gets there. So I have these options. I have network security group availability just to be deployed. And when you create a VM, a network security group is created by default for you. These are, think of these as access control lists. They can be applied to the network card of the VM or to the subnet itself. And if you have both of them, then they are both in play as you're filtering your traffic. So now you can filter that only port 443 gets through, or port 80, or whatever port that is that needs to get accessed or blocked or whatever. You have these features available to you. Firewalls are available to you. Now there's an Azure firewall. And as I mentioned earlier, you could put third-party firewalls into your world. VPN connections between. Now the VPN connections not only for site to site, but for point to site. So your users have a way to make a direct connection into the Azure world and be able to work as if they're internal. The site to site can be connecting your on-prem world to the Azure world, so it acts as one large network for you. So these are the things that Microsoft gives you, and there's so many more. Application gateways, traffic managers, geo load balancers, a lot of infrastructure that is available here to not only secure, but to also manage the traffic flow through your environment. So you can build as robust an environment as you want out there, or as simple as environment as you want. You're not going to be hamstrung on that. Storage. A lot of people first consider the cloud to get the very large storage that's offered up there. And blob storage is one of the more popular storage resources that you get into Azure. It's a flat namespace object store that's designed for storing massive amounts of unstructured data. So these where your backups could go if you wanted to do offsite archiving backups. This is where your live data could go, because this could be a high performing storage, or this could be where your archive data goes. Maybe you purchase a lower performing version of the blob storage, and we'll talk about that in a minute here. They have data lake styles, which now offer data lakes allow you to store data in the data's natural format. And the data lake is a storage platform that allows that kind of storage up in there. Again, it can be hierarchical. You can put security to it, all of that stuff. So you have those storages. You have queue-based storages, first in, first out kind of a queue. So if you want to have automated processes, there's a storage resource to pick just to help you with that. There's table storage if you just want some structured data without like a SQL database. There's storage available for that. And of course, there's disk storage for your Azure VM. This is your VHD files that you attach. So we have, there's multiple different types of storage that can be used to match the type of use you require. And the storage, I'm showing blob here, but this is true with other storages as well. You can get it in a hot tier, which means it's live, it's active, and it's going to respond to you quickly. A cool tier, almost think the difference between SDD and HDD. It's a lower performing disk, so lower performing, lower cost, but this data you don't necessarily need to get as quickly. It doesn't need to perform as well. And then there's the cold and the archive storage, which costs the least and could take a while to become available to you when you need it, but it then can be brought online and be made available to you as you need it. Managed disks, these are those VHDs. They can be built on top of HDD disks, SDD disks, premium SSDs, which are now we're starting to build arrays, and then the Ultra, which is a high-speed array disk. So you can get performance from very basic all the way up through very high-performing VHD disks. Now, that's one of the great advantages of the cloud over an on-prem world, is the different varieties of storage I can have without having to have different types of storage in my environment. So that's a great advantage, because one VM may be using an HDD, another could be using an Ultra, and I don't have to buy something for the Ultra and buy something for the standard on-prem. I can just use that up in the cloud. A strong reason to go. Your storage is redundant in the cloud. By default, you get 3 copies of all your data. And they could be either locally redundant within the particular data center. So they're like within the same rack, and then there's another copy in another rack and on another server. So at least you have rack failure, server failure type of protection. You could take your 3 copies and spread them across the 3 zones if you wanted. So your storage is now zone redundant. So there's one copy in one data center, another copy in another data center. Now you've given yourself data center protection. Geo redundant. So you could have your 3 copies in one place and your 3 copies in another if you wanted, and replicate it from east to west if you want. So I can have very high availability storage. The 3 copies is by default. You don't choose to do that. You just choose how you want that deployed. So let's talk a little bit about what the cloud offers in the world of compute. So in your virtual machines, you can put your Windows machines up there. You can put your Linux machines up there. And there is a large variety of machine models, all with different CPU, RAM, configurations, different types of CPUs for performance purposes. You can read about this, the specs of each one of these different series on the Microsoft site and pick the one that you need that would best fit your environment. You can have a very low processing one to handle very mundane tasks, and you can have a very high performance one to handle, performances that you need for a particular application. So, now, I meant to put the link there. You're going to get a PDF after this, so this is not going to work. But I guess if you just searched virtual machine series up there, you can get to the page where you can see what these specs are. All right. Scale sets with your virtual machine. So now you can have a group of virtual machines that can scale up, scale out dynamically as demand requires. So as performance needs to increase, maybe I'm going to scale out and add more and more VMs into the scale set. So there's more and more machines processing. Or maybe I scale up to get more memory and CPU as demand requires. And as demand no longer requires, they can pull back down again and save you some money. So you can get the performance you need without having to pay for that max performance all the time by building things like scale sets for certain levels of applications, like a website or something like that, that may only need 3 or 4 VMs to run it normally, but maybe needs to scale to 8 during peak periods. So you have these options available to you. All right, so we can be building scale sets that work in what's called a flexible mode or a uniform mode. You can manually configure what your scale set could be, or you could let it auto scale. If you let it auto scale, it's going to ask you questions about, at what point do I go up? What point do I go down, et cetera. So you have all these kind of configurations, and this is just the initial screenshot. You would actually have to hit configure to see all the options here. But these scaling up and scaling down can be under your control, or it can be under the control of the parameters that you configure for that. You can move over to something like a platform as a service, managed file shares. So if you have SMB shares, NFS shares, your storage account can support those file shares. Now the file shares support NTFS permissions, so they're compatible with your Windows, but you no longer need the file server. You could just use the file shares. Now this is a platform as a service. This particular service has the capability, you can put a server up in front of that to cache it on-prem if you need a little more performance than what your WAN can offer you. But now what we can do is give you file shares without the file server. You no longer manage that piece of it. You just get to use the file shares. And because it's Azure storage, you have all this high availability of the storage itself. The 3 copies you get by default, and then you can choose to replicate that if you want. So your file shares could be being replicated between East and West and are always available for you if in a regional failure. SQL services. Now we're gonna, we can always build a VM and install SQL on it, just like you do today in an on-prem world. You build a Windows server, you put SQL some version on it and manage it. That's still available to you in Azure. You could do that. But there's, so that's one of the options you have. But there's also the platform as a service with SQL. So now if you want to get out of the business of manage the Windows Server and just manage the SQL database, there's different ways you can deploy that up into Azure, but now that's available to you. You can deploy it as a single database with its own defined sets of resources. So you define the processing power that you want up underneath of that, and now that's dedicated to your database. So that's one way you can deploy it. You can deploy it as an elastic pool. So let's say you have 4 or 5 databases that you need to deploy. If you put them on an elastic pool, think similar to a scale set, you have a series of machines that will either grow or shrink as necessary to process what those databases require. Very helpful if you have these 4 or 5 databases, and at one moment, database 1 is very busy, and another moment, database 3 is very busy. They still pull from the same pool, but you don't have to have high-end resources for each of those databases. They'll just use what's available across the elastic pool. And again, the elastic pool can grow. There's also something called a managed instance. That is the Microsoft's recommended way that if you just want to lift and shift from on-premises SQL right up into the Azure SQL to move it into a managed instance. So if you have an app that requires guaranteed performance, the single is where you want to go. If you have a shared series of databases, you can put them on a shared series of VMs that, each database can use whatever resources it needs. And the managed instance is what you'd want to use if you want to consider a quick lift and shift to get it up out of your environment and into the cloud. So Microsoft has given you the performance that you would normally have with a single. They've given you the ability to save some money, because if you had a database on a VM today, each one of those databases, that VM would have had to been configured to handle the maximum amount of performance that database would ever require. But maybe that database only needs that for 1 hour a day, and the rest of the time it's running fairly low. You still had all that processing power with it, but now Microsoft's offering you things like elastic pools to let that move and save you a little money as it pulls back its resources a little bit. And then Microsoft gives you a way to migrate quickly if that's the way you want to move. App services, similar in concept to what happened in the SQL. You define what performance level you want sitting up underneath your web apps. That's called your app service plan. And then on top of that, your web app runs. You manage the web app. You're not managing the servers up underneath there. You've just defined how much horsepower you want them to be. And you do that by defining the type of machine you want under there, but you're not managing that machine. That machine will be managed. That's just all you're really doing is defining what that performance will look like. How many CPUs do I want? How much memory do I want? How many machines do I want underneath of it? Traditional, you manage the OS to the app service. The app services in Azure allow you to separate that. You now focus on your web app and don't worry about this once you got that set. That's one of the advantages of platforms as a service, is it's taking you away from managing the lower end things and lets you focus on the things more pertinent to the business. The applications are what drive the business. That's why you have them in the first place. So let's focus our management there. Azure offers you backups and disaster recovery services. So the Azure backup service, here you configure what you want to back up. That's your backup instances. Your policies on which they want to be used for backup. How many times a day do you want me to do a backup? Where do you want me to write it to? Is this a snapshot, or is this going to be for quick restore, or is this going to all be written off-site to a second location? And then you can also define where it's being written to. And then is that vault, the destination of the backup, is that local and then replicated off-site? So you can now have replication down in here. And then of course you have all the monitoring that you normally get with any backup software. Here's what's currently running, here's any alerts that I've had, et cetera. And you got the main screen on that. So these vaults are where the backups are written. They have two types there. There's a recovery services vault and there's a backup vault. And each one supports different things. So it depends on what it is you're backing up, depends on what kind of vault you have. And of course, you can have multiple vaults, and your backup, the Azure backup can handle there's multiple vaults. This backup job is writing to vault, a recovery services vault. This other job is writing to a backup vault. So it's just a matter of an underlying technology. So your recovery services vault is used for backup. Your Azure Site Recovery, which I'll talk about in a minute, is a DR program, uses the recovery services vault. Azure disks and Kubernetes services and things like that need a backup vault. So you choose the type of vault for the type of backups you want to do, and you're not locked in that. You can have multiples of these. You could have multiple backup vaults, one for some subset of your resources, another for another subset of your resources. One of those vaults get replicated because they're high priority. The other is more administrative use, backups of administrative systems. So maybe you don't need to replicate that, offsite to another region or anything like that. So we can have multiple vaults, and you don't have to have one big fat vault and replicate that one big fat vault when not all the data needs that. So you have all kinds of flexibility there. If you want to now reach down to your on-premises world, you can do that in one of two ways. There's an agent that you can put on your physical server or PC, and that will connect up to the Azure backup, and Azure backups can run there. Or you can put a backup server in your environment that is like the central point for disk to disk backup that's going to happen. So these workloads write to the backup server, which then writes it up to Azure for the backup. So we can handle your on-prem world. My recommendation, though, is if you're thinking along these lines, is the Azure backup. Yes, it can reach down to your on-prem world. You probably don't want that to be the long-term solution for you. You might want to even consider using Veeam if you want to have a long-term on-premises and Azure backup going on. Veeam's a good product for that. The Azure backup reach down into the on-prem world. It's not marketed that way, but it seems to perform in such a way that it's really there as a stopgap before you move everything up to the cloud. So just put that one in the back of your mind. But it's there. So if if you're getting some things up in Azure and there'll be a few things remaining for a year or so, the Azure backup may be the solution for you. That without having to replace, go to another backup service or anything like that. Right. And of course, the backup supports immutable storage. So once it's backed up, it can't be changed. That protects you against ransomware. Azure Site Recovery is a great tool to put your foot in the door of getting up into Azure, because this can replicate Azure VMs or on-premise VMs and machines and get them up into Azure ready for failover. So if something failed on-prem, you can fail over and get it into your target environment. Right? How it does that is these machines that you've configured for site recovery are writing their data to a storage account in your tenant, and then that data is being replicated where you want it to go into the target environment. This diagram showing East US and Central to US. Notice there's no VM, so you're not paying for VMs. You're paying for storage and replication traffic while it's over there. And then in the event of a failure, the VMs are brought up and the disks attached, and you're working in this other location. This is not the full thing you need to do for DR. You still have to find ways of redirecting your people over to the new location, et cetera, but your data comes up in a matter of minutes as these VMs are constituted and disks attached and they come online. This tool allows you to run backup drills in an offline mode, so you don't have to worry about online replication. What it can do in the test is it brings up these VMs in an isolated subnet in the target region so that you can now log into them and make sure at least all the data came up, the machines came up, everything seems to be talking within that subnet. You'll have to plan what your tests will look like, but it does give you that capability. You can run planned failovers without losing any data, because what would happen in a planned failover is that last synchronization would happen and then it would do the failover. But if you had an unplanned failover, depending on how frequently you're replicating your data, these machines are going to come up quickly on the other side, maybe minus that last replication. So you're not losing a lot of data at that. So we have those tools. Now think of this as maybe your first step to get up into Azure if you're not there, because you're going to replicate your on-prem and use Azure as your DR site. All right. So that's a great tool for that. It has recovery plans. So what recovery plans do is it orchestrates the bringing up of machines into the other environment. Yes, I'll need my domain controllers first, and then I'll need these databases. Then I can bring up the app server, etc. So it handles these multi-tiered applications, allowing everything to come up in the right order so that it is available before the next step starts. Right. It's configured right out of the recovery services vault by just clicking the enable recovery. All right, so network security. Again, we talked about the various things within the network itself here, from firewalls to route tables that control where things can go, to network security groups, VPN connections. All of that stuff's available to you in networking and more. With identity security, Azure provides the Enter ID directory just as your Office 365 uses. It's the same directory. And that directory then can be protected with conditional access policies that maybe trigger MFA, has location restrictions, etc. Privileged identity management, where your privileged accounts do not have those privileged roles assigned to them until you need them assigned, and then they'll get elevated. Access reviews, where you can hand out to your business unit managers, have them look at the memberships of the groups that they're responsible for, and they can decide, do they have the right membership? So you can always make sure that people are being removed from groups that they no longer be required to have, or added to groups. Single sign-on, and that's a security feature, especially when you're dealing with third-party SaaS apps. And we've talked about that in another webinar, but all this stuff becomes available to you because it's of Enter ID. It's there, just like you have with your Office 365. Your administrative control, remote access, role-based access control, so we can control access to our resources by looking at any particular resource and looking at its access control, and here who are the people that have permissions to do something with that. These can be defined by job function. So people with these job functions can have read, write. These people with this other job function can have read, write rights. Or we can grant privileged administrative roles. So this would be Exchange administrator, database administrator, those kinds of things. You can always view who has access to managing your resources. So this is all out for you to just click on a button and see who has access in one quick look on that. So they can be applied to, to something called a management group, which is a collection of subscriptions. So you can apply rights at the subscription level. You can apply those rights down at the resource group level, or all the way down at the resource level. So these role-based access controls can be applied at each of these levels. They can be being changed as it goes up and down the hierarchy, so you can get the security that you need for who can manage what. All right, so let me just, I'm sorry, I confused myself. All right, storage security. I'm going to blow through this pretty quick because we're getting a little short of time here. So in addition to the fact that your data is encrypted at rest and in transit, that is a given for all storage. We have access control to your storage. So I'm looking at the properties of a storage account in this picture right here. So I can define who has access to this. I can define what kind of replication it has, whether it's local, geo, read access geo redundant, zone redundant, etc. Do I have anonymous access? Do I have soft delete and versioning capabilities turned on so I can get back for earlier versions of my data? And these are where you would check all those off and decide what you want to turn on and what you don't want to turn on. I can configure where can this storage be connected from? What's the source that can gain access to this? Can all my networks gain access? Only certain networks. Maybe I'm going to disable public access altogether and only allow private access. In other words, it has to be on the private, all source activity has to be on my private networks to gain access to this. I have those capabilities. So I have that kind of storage security, all right? So where do we go from here? You're thinking about moving to Azure. What's some of the things you want to be considering? Well, obviously, the first thing you want to do is take a look at what your current pain points are. What needs to be fixed, what needs to be upgraded, what's not on the screen here, I'll add here. What's the market demanding of you now? What do you need to add into your environment potentially? Right? What are the business drivers? What technologies need to change? Your business changes over time. Who thought we'd have been working so remotely and working off our mobile phones as much as we did when you were looking back at the, I mean, if you were in this industry 15 years ago, would you be thinking what we have today? So, what is your business changing to? What technologies do you need? You got to document that and plan to what you think that's going to be in the future. What regulatory or business constraints that you have? What can move to the cloud? What cannot move to the cloud? What are your fault tolerance requirements and your disaster recovery requirements? Because that will determine how we're going to build the Azure world. Again, not everything can move to the cloud. You may have constraints that will prevent you moving certain things to the cloud, but that may let you still move other things and take advantage of the cloud for other things. Are you going to lift and shift? Are you going to implement a PaaS or a SaaS solution? Are you going to build a centralized into one data center or decentralized across multiple regions? What's your cloud-like world going to look like when you get there? Then you want to start to determine the rough cost of that cloud environment and what the migration costs are. And this is where System Source can give you a lot of help in its planning stages as well. Because we can help you, with trigger questions like, have you considered X or Y, or things like that. And then we can even help you get a rough cost of what this might look like and what the migrations might look like. So you can see what's in play and what might not be in play financially for you. All right. Find out if you have low-hanging fruit. You can get up into Azure quickly. If you're not in Azure now, getting there fairly soon with something at least lets you start building experience and getting familiar with performance, management, things like that, so that when you do need to move something that's business critical, it's not a foreign environment to you anymore. So having something up there is for your own IT benefit. So it's something you're, again, familiar with. And then we want to develop a migration plan and the timeline so you can see what this looks like. And again, that migration plan doesn't have to be for everything. It could be for the few things that you might want to move. Maybe everything, again, who knows? And this is where we can be very helpful. We do this all the time. Migrations just seem to be the thing right now. And migrating people to Office 365 or into the Azure world. So I'm going to suggest if you have questions or just want some time to talk about it, reach out and we can maybe do some whiteboard planning sessions with you so you can get the basic questions answered. So quickly in summary, Azure is a resilient global platform built for high availability and rapid deployments. It's those rapid deployments that are probably very required in modern world, so we can get things out quickly while the market needs it. The cloud infrastructure supports emerging technology, so instead of you having to build it from the ground up and build all the integration, Azure is going to do that for you. You just need to deploy the device and it will tell you how to integrate it as you're deploying it. Capabilities can be scaled to offer small businesses the technologies you may not be able to afford on your own on-premises world. There are just things that are expensive out there. So instead of deploying the whole thing, just subscribe to the pieces and parts that you need to run your own business. Flexibility, again, quick deploy, quick decommission, quick changes, many times without reboots on some things. You can just change the SKU of something and now you have a more powerful machine, sometimes with reboots and things like that. But now you can be flexible to move as the market and your day-to-day business requires. And of course, it's a very secure platform. Everything's built on security. It meets several regulatory agencies' accreditations, and plus they give you tools to tell you what you should be tying down yourself for security. And that's really the case for why you might want to move to Azure, with some examples of some things that would be of benefit to you. And now I'm going to hand it back to Chris for this portion.
Thank you very much, Dave. We do have some classes coming up and some discounts there through this 26th of this month for those who attended today. So if you're looking to kind of go deeper into training on Azure, there's a number of courses here. Again, this will be in the PDF when you receive it today. And I want to thank Dave for his time today and for each of you for your time. We don't have any questions here, so I'll give you back the rest of your day. And thank you very much for your time and hope this was useful for you. Thank you, everyone.